But first up this week, an article from the io9.com website, and it's written by Esther Inglis Arkell. What caused this deadly epidemic in Spain in 1981? In 1981, over 600 people in Spain died from a mysterious illness. Panic mounted as people across Europe read the news. Eventually the epidemic was declared the result of food contamination. But some scientists think there may be more to the story. In May 1981, a small child died from what seemed to the staff of a local hospital to be pneumonia. Before long, his entire family was in the hospital. This was unusual enough. Families are exposed to each other's diseases, but few diseases are that virulent. Soon, though, it looked like there was a resurgence of the plague in Spain. People across the country went to hospitals in droves, all with similar symptoms: nausea, vomiting, and a steadily increasing trouble taking a breath. Significantly, families tended to come in together. This is what caused officials to believe that the plague was not a disease. They searched the houses of the affected families and found one thing: olive oil that was not actually olive oil. The oily substance, which had been sold as cheap olive oil by 40 different merchants, was actually rapeseed oil or colza oil. Colza is grown across Europe, and it is oil that is generally used for industrial lubricants. This batch of oil had been dosed with aniline, a herbicide, to make sure nobody ate it. The merchants in the market got hold of it anyway. Sometimes they removed the aniline, sometimes they did not. The Spanish government instituted an oil exchange policy, taking the contaminated oil off the streets. The government spent much of the 1980s building a case against the 40 merchants who had sold the contaminated oil. Some epidemiologists think that it was, instead, covering its own errors. They claim the oil wasn't to blame. Many scientists believe the aniline contaminated oil theory. The most prominent among these were Sir Richard Doll, whose previous work included making the connection between cigarettes and lung cancer. Others, including 2 scientists hired by the Spanish government to track the epidemic, don't believe the oil was the cause. The timeline, they claim, is off. People as a whole began getting better before the announcement about the tainted oil was made and before the exchange program began. They believe that toxic oil syndrome is organophosphate poisoning. Organophosphates are pesticides, but early in the 20th century they enjoyed a less savoury reputation. They were once used as nerve gases and were banned for that use by the Geneva Conventions. Among the signs of organophosphate poisoning are nausea, vomiting, and difficulty breathing, although they can also cause muscle twitches and a host of other symptoms. So, while some people believed the poisoned oil was to blame for the plague, others think that pesticides were leaked near homes and resulted in the death of hundreds. The history of science is filled with macabre tales of self-experimentation, amoral experimentation on others, horrific accidents, and even mysterious and sinister disappearances. Perhaps the most unusual tale I've come across, however, involves an alleged duel, not with swords or guns, but with sausages. From the skullinthestars.com website, The Great Sausage Duel of 1865. The opponents in this duel are as incongruous as the choice of weapons. On one side we have the formidable Otto von Bismarck, 1815 to 1898, the Minister-President of Prussia, appointed by and second only to the king himself. On the other side, we have the energetic, clever and contradictory scientist and politician Rudolf Virchow, 1821 to 1902, leader of the Progressive Party in the Prussian legislature, the Landtag. Before we describe the duel, let us set the stage. In 1861, King Frederick William IV died, and his brother took the throne as King Wilhelm. The new regent almost immediately came into conflict with the very liberal Prussian Diet, deliberative assembly, and the intransigence of both sides led to a significant budget crisis of the government. After some resistance, Wilhelm finally agreed in 1862 to appoint Bismarck as Minister-President to deal with the assembly. Bismarck was an obvious choice, as he had already demonstrated himself as a shrewd and bold politician and one who was loyal to the king. When a revolution was sparked in Prussia in 1848 and control of Berlin was lost, Bismarck tried to rally the peasants on his estate into an army to come to the king's aid. His actions apparently did not go unnoticed, as when the revolution failed within a year, Bismarck was elected to the Landtag. From there he made friends and enemies and went through a number of different political positions. Envoy to the Diet of the German Confederation, member of the Prussian House of Lords, ambassador to Russia and France. In his new role, Bismarck clashed regularly with the Prussian Diet. One of his most vocal opponents was Rudolf Virchow, who had been elected the same year as Bismarck's appointment, 1862, and he became leader of the Radical or Progressive Party. The fact that the two men were ideologically very different is exemplified in the fact that Virchow was a supporter of the revolution of 1848, the same revolution that Bismarck tried to strike down. Virchow was not only a politician, but a scientist, though one who, in hindsight, has a somewhat spotted scientific record. He was a pioneer of cell biology and one of the early proponents of what is known as cell theory. As a doctor, Virchow made advancements in anatomy, pathology and autopsy processes. Also important to our tale is he made a detailed study of Trichinella parasite in 1865, of which we will say more momentarily. Virchow also had a number of hugely incorrect beliefs, however. He rejected the germ theory of disease, believing that diseases came from within cells, not from invading organisms. He was also vehemently against Darwin's theory of evolution, even going so far as to give public addresses in 1877 blasting Darwin's ideas, claiming that it was, in essence, only a hypothesis. Things came to a head in 1865 during a debate over funding for the Navy, as described in the 1880 book German Political Leaders. It was on the 30th of May 1865, during that protracted struggle between Bismarck and the House. The estimates for the Navy had just been rejected. The Minister-President remarked that the denial of any and every allowance for the fleet was in singular contrast to the zeal with which the Liberals had formerly pressed for a strengthening of that arm of the service. Professor Virchow replied, "The project was not seriously meant. It was only a feint. But it is a perversion of the truth to say that the committee had no interest in the Marine. If the Minister-President has read the report, then I do not know what I shall say of his honesty. The truth is that the reserves in the State Treasury are decreasing, that the means of carrying on the government without a budget are growing less, and that it is sought to restore the deficiency by a loan in order to be able still to sit by warm stoves." The majority laughed when Bismarck inquired where matters would end if insults were uttered which demanded personal satisfaction, and he added to the House, "There is an opportunity for that, if it be agreeable to you." Virchow would not retract his words. The President would not call him to order. The next day, Bismarck sent Virchow a challenge. From here I turn to a slightly later publication from 1893 to describe what happened next. At the end of a particularly severe attack, Bismarck felt himself personally affronted and sent seconds to Virchow with a challenge to fight a duel. The man of science was found in his laboratory, hard at work at experiments which had for their object the discovery of a means of destroying trichinae, which were making great ravages in Germany. "Oh," said the doctor, "a challenge from Prince Bismarck, eh? Well, well, as I am the challenged party, I suppose I have the choice of weapons. Here they are." He held up 2 large sausages which seemed to be exactly alike. "One of these sausages," he said, "is filled with trichinae. It is deadly. The other is perfectly wholesome. Externally they cannot be told apart. Let His Excellency do me the honour to choose whichever of these he wishes, and eat it, and I will eat the other." Thus the proposition was as reasonable as any duelling proposition could be. Prince B's representatives refused it. No duel was fought, and no one accused Virchow of cowardice. Though you may have never heard of trichinosis by name before, you've no doubt been warned about it. The parasitic disease is caught by eating raw or undercooked pork containing the Trichinella spiralis roundworm, to quote Wikipedia on the effects of the infection. The first symptoms may appear between 12 hours and 2 days after ingestion of infected meat. The migration of worms in the intestinal epithelium can cause traumatic damage to the host tissue, and the waste products they excrete can provoke an immunological reaction. The resulting inflammation can cause symptoms such as nausea, vomiting, sweating, and diarrhea. 5 to 7 days after the appearance of symptoms, facial edema and fever may occur. After 10 days, intense muscular pain, difficulty breathing, weakening of pulse and blood pressure, heart damage, and various nervous disorders may occur, eventually leading to death due to heart failure, respiratory complications, or kidney malfunction. Pretty nasty stuff. It is no surprise that Bismarck would balk at a duel involving trichinosis. The story is nearly a perfect one. The rational man of science, Rudolf Virchow, outwits the blustery and powerful former military man, Otto von Bismarck. It has been told again and again, and even appeared in the 1971 book Isaac Asimov's Treasury of Humour. The only problem, it seems likely that the story isn't true. Let me continue the description of the fight between Bismarck and Virchow from German political leaders. The next day Bismarck set Virchow a challenge, which of course was not accepted. The political friends of the professor counselled him to decline, and he received many addresses of approval from the country. This incident caused a great sensation at the time, but it was nearly forgotten by the present generation when it was cited not long ago in a singular way in court. A gentleman was on trial for sending a challenge, a species of pleasure that the German laws have long denied, except to the military, and in mitigation of sentence the defendant referred to the case of Bismarck versus Virchow, and observed that Bismarck had never been prosecuted for his challenge. The judge replied that he was not prosecuted because he was protected by the military uniform, which, as an officer in the Landwehr, he is accustomed and entitled to wear. The story of the duel is very different and quite mundane in this account. In fact, I can find no description of the sausage duel before 1893, where it pops up in multiple publications. The timing of the story appearing is itself perhaps significant, as it was only 3 years earlier that Bismarck was forced to resign his dual positions of Chancellor of Germany and Minister-President of Prussia. With the formal political power in retirement, there was little risk of him stepping forward to refute false stories. The most damning evidence comes from Bismarck's own correspondence, however. For instance, we have the original letter of challenge from Bismarck to Virchow. Berlin, June 8, 65. During the sitting on the 2nd Inst., You personally insulted me by casting doubt upon my veracity. On the following day I requested you, through Herr v. Puttkamer, to grant me the satisfaction to which I consider myself entitled. Your reply led me to hope that you would settle the matter with an apology, but the negotiations which have been interrupted by your absence have not produced this result. I am therefore compelled to repeat my demand for satisfaction made on the 3rd inst, and to ask you to state if you are ready to comply with my demand made to you through Herr v. Puttkamer. In this case I beg you to name one of your friends to make further arrangements respecting place and time with the Minister for War, who will be kind enough to act as my witness. Awaiting your kind reply, I am, your obedient servant, V. Bismarck Schonhausen. Virchow was not particularly eager to engage in a duel, as the Minister for War reported that same day. Berlin, June 8, 65. Dear B, I have just been to Virchow's and found that he had gone out at 7 o'clock. I am now going to the chamber, where, if possible, I will execute my commission. All things considered, it seems to me that you can hardly settle the business in question in time to leave for Stralsund this evening. I will do my best, however. Your V. Rune. Still that same day, it seems that members of the Assembly decided that duels were outdated and not something that members of the government should be engaged in, as soon as V. Rune reported to Bismarck. Berlin, June 8, 65. The President of the House of Deputies has declared on the motion of Falkenbeck that Virchow may not fight, and that it is for the House alone to decide whether a minister is insulted. I replied, a man is the guardian of his own honour. The discussion on the subject has been going on for 3/4 of an hour. At the present moment the lion of the tribe of Judah is roaring. The shorthand report shall be sent to you as soon as possible. V. Rune. My letter to Virchow cannot be delivered, as he has not returned home. I enclose it herewith. Still the same day, Virchow seems to have backed down himself from his own statements, as his own associate relayed to one of Bismarck's colleagues. Berlin, June 8, 65. I have received no further intelligence as to whether you consider that there is no longer a prospect of the difference between Herr v. Bismarck and Professor Virchow being adjusted. Professor Virchow wishes to end the matter and has charged me to inform you that he considers that he has done everything possible on his part towards a settlement, in expressing his readiness to make the statement desired by Bismarck on one condition, at which no offence can be taken. As no reply has as yet been received to this, I am further charged to inform you that Professor Virchow decidedly declines to fight a duel. The more so as the affair has been made public through no fault of his own, and has even been discussed today in the Chamber of Deputies. His political friends, and also the President of the House, have imposed on him as a duty the non-acceptance of the duel. Kindly acquaint Herr von Bismarck with this, and at the same time inform him that Professor Virchow is ready to make the promised statement in the House, with the condition formulated by me. I would add explicitly that only the sense and not the wording of the latter is of moment to him. Respectfully yours, Hennig. Finally, Virchow himself wrote to Bismarck to end the affair. Undated, but postmarked July 8, 65, 9 a.m. Your Excellency, I beg to reply to your favour of today's date that Herr von Hennig has today informed Herr von Kudel in my name, 1. That I decline the duel. 2. That I am ready to make the statement in the House desired by the Minister-President as soon as I receive the Minister-President's assurance that there was no personal insult intended to the members of the committee in his remarks on Hannibal Fischer. As I have gone to the utmost bounds of possibility in making this concession, I should be glad if any further negotiations respecting the wording of the statement might be conducted, as heretofore through the medium of Herr v. Hennig. Accept the assurance of my highest esteem, which I subscribe myself. Your Excellency's most respectful R. Virchow, Member of the House of Deputies. So, where does this leave us? It looks like the story of the sausage is made up, as it only becomes widely reported some 30 years after it allegedly occurred. Earlier accounts of the duel do not mention the sausages at all, and Bismarck's correspondence tells a different story. It seems like a story that was created sometime later to tell a story of a scientific underdog outwitting a bully of a soldier. I almost prefer the true story, however. Virchow refused to play Bismarck's savage game, even with a new set of rules and sausages. He does not seem to have lost his reputation in the matter, and may have even gained esteem in the process. There is a punchline to this tale. Where would such a bizarre tale come from in the first place? The 1893 version of the tale I quoted came from Volume 22 of Homeopathic News, a monthly homeopathic medical journal. I can't think of a more amusing end to this post than the thought that the fraudulent medical science promoted a fictitious historical account. From the coolinterestingstuff.com website. Makhunik, the ancient city of very little people with an alien link. The ancient Iranian city of Makhunik is an ancient Iranian city unearthed in the desert of Shahdad, Kerman province, in the 1940s. It is now known as Shahr-i-Kutalea, or the City of Dwarves. However, since its discovery, the city of Makhunik has been called many things. The home of the little people, city of the dwarf, and little sky man's land. The village is strange for a number of reasons. Firstly, according to Iran Daily, nobody thought an ancient civilization could exist in this desert until 1946. Therefore, the village discovery created quite a buzz amongst archaeologists in the 1940s, given the unexpectedness of the find. A group of archaeologists visited the area and conducted studies that led to the discovery of civilizations belonging to prehistoric times, the end of the 4th millennium BC and the beginning of the 3rd millennium BC. Shahdad's ancient region is spread over 60 kilometres in the heart of the Lut Desert. The city includes workshops, residential districts and cemeteries. Archaeological studies in the residential district in depth and revealed the presence of sub-districts in which jewellers, craftsmen and farmers lived. Over 800 ancient graves have been excavated during the first excavation phases. Every grave has contained the evidence of little people, including the mummified remains of a dwarf. A significant aspect of the city is the strange architecture of the houses, alleys and advanced equipment discovered. Within the city, the houses' walls, ceiling, furnaces, shelves all seem to be made for little people, and all the equipment discovered could only be used by dwarfs. Soon after the discovery of the city of dwarfs in Shahdad and stories about peoples who lived there, rumours circulated about the discovery of a dwarf's remains and alien evidence. Rumours also followed about the discovery of a crashed UFO. According to Dr. Susan Martinez, author of The History of the Little People, Spiritually Advanced Civilizations Around the World, an ancient race of people who were small in stature once inhabited the earth. She refers to legends and stories from many cultures, such as the dwarf gods of Mexico and Peru, the Mahune of Hawaii, the Nanai of the Cherokee, as well as African pygmies and the Semang of Malaysia, and draws upon discoveries of tiny tunnel networks, small coffins, low doorways in mounds, and pygmy-sized huts as evidence of this ancient race. And if you visit the show notes at the website www.origins.info and click on the link to this story in the Mysteries Abound show notes, there are some photographs of the city, some drawings of the little people, and a photograph of some remains of a mummified dwarf. And whilst we're discussing little guys that may be aliens, from the www.iflscience.com website, a story by Lisa Winter. What's the real deal about the Atacama alien? Researchers made a mysterious discovery in Chile's Atacama Desert in 2003. This tiny skeleton looked human, but had many features that left scientists scratching their heads. When the images hit the internet, many people assumed the only explanation could be aliens. Thankfully, more reasonable heads prevailed, and the remains were subject to a battery of forensic testing in order to identify how this anomalous skeleton, nicknamed Ata, came to be. So what made this specimen so peculiar? For starters, the skeleton was only 15 centimetres or 6 inches long. Many initially speculated that the remains were from a premature birth or miscarried fetus, though others disregarded the whole thing as a hoax. Ata's size isn't the only thing that perplexed researchers. A host of physical deformities did not make it entirely clear if the skeleton is human or a non-human primate. Humans have 12 ribs, but this individual only had 10. The skull indicated that the organism could have had pterocephaly, which gives the head a cone-shaped appearance, which really didn't help dissuade people for thinking Ata was an alien. Additional deformity of the face and jaw made the head look squished, giving it the appearance that it was even further away from a typical human. The skeleton remained in a private collection until 2009, when it had been brought to a symposium in Barcelona. In the fall of 2012, scientists were given an opportunity to study Ata via X-rays, CAT scans and genetic sampling. Imaging showed that the chest cavity still had the remains of lungs and a heart inside. The Atacama Desert is one of the most arid regions on the planet and would allow biological material to preserve incredibly well. The preliminary genetic results do not indicate the skeleton is definitely of human origin, but about 9% of the DNA tested did not match the human genome reference. While 9% sounds like a huge discrepancy, it just refers to the sequence portions used for reference, not the entire genome. The results are well within the expected parameters for contamination and degradation of the DNA after spending so long exposed to the elements. The preliminary results of the mitochondrial DNA were consistent with a haplotype found in Chile, meaning Ata's mother was local to the area where the remains were found. One of the most amazing discoveries from the analysis was that Ata was not a fetus. There were mature teeth present in the mouth and the bones were well developed, with the leg bones showing growth plates that one would expect to see in a 6 to 8-year-old child. While the testing did provide answers, it also raised many more questions. How could a 6-year-old child be only 6 inches long? There are a few possibilities to explain this. Dwarfism. It is possible that Ata was afflicted with an extreme case of dwarfism, though the smallest person ever confirmed was 54.6 centimetres or 21.5 inches tall. Also, no genetic indicators of dwarfism have been identified as yet. Progeria. Ata could be a fetus that suffered from extreme form of progeria, which brings about the symptoms of ageing very early in life. However, there aren't any genetic indicators of that disease yet either. Mummification. It is possible that the genotype and phenotype aren't matching up because there weren't any genetic anomalies. Ata may have been stillborn or miscarried and then subjected to badly performed desiccation or mummification, causing the bones to take on such an odd appearance. But this can't explain or account for the 2 missing ribs or growth plates within the bones. While we do know that Ata was human, and most definitely not an extraterrestrial, No matter what the documentary Sirius has to say, that's about the extent of what can be said for sure. More thorough genetic testing is still ongoing, and researchers are trying to reconcile the base pairs that did not match up with the human reference. The only information that has been released so far has been preliminary, though the researchers have pledged that further results will go through the appropriate peer review channels and be published in an accredited scientific journal. And if you'd like to have a look at Arta, visit the show notes, click on the link to this article. There is quite a clear photograph there. And if you do take a look at the photograph, you may come to the opinion, like many others, that it could be an alien creature, because it definitely is quite unusual. Maybe we'll find out one day exactly what it is. In June 2009, archaeologists made a shocking discovery in the seaside town of Weymouth in Dorset, England. While excavating in preparation for the anticipated Weymouth Relief Road, archaeologists discovered a mass grave containing the remains of 54 dismembered skeletons and 51 skulls in a pile within a disused Roman quarry. The curious find led many to wonder who these individuals were and why they were killed in such a gruesome manner. Through scientific testing and analysis, archaeologists concluded that the remains belonged to Scandinavian Vikings. The sheer size of this burial is particularly surprising, as any mass grave is a relatively rare find, but to find one on this scale, from this period of history, is extremely unusual, said David Score of Oxford Archaeology. Although exact dating has not been confirmed, it is believed that the remains are those of individuals who lived sometime during the Middle Ages, between the 5th and 10th centuries. The deaths likely occurred during, and as a result of, conflict between the Anglo-Saxons and Viking invaders. All of the remains are from males, mostly aged from their late teens to 25 years old, with a few being somewhat older. None of the remains show any sign of battle wounds, beyond wounds inflicted during the execution, so it is likely that these men were captives rather than members of the military. No clothing or other remnants were found within the pit, leading to speculation that the men were naked when they were executed. The men appear to have been killed all at the same time, and the executions appear to have been carried out hastily and rather chaotically. Some of the individuals showed multiple blows and deep cuts to vertebrae, jawbones and skulls. Damage to the hand and wrist bones indicates that some of them may have braced against the execution with their hands. When the remains were discovered, the skulls, leg bones and rib bones were arranged into separate piles. It appeared that the pit had not been dug specifically for this purpose, and that it just happened to be a convenient spot to dump the bodies. One interesting detail is that there were 3 fewer skulls than the number of skeletons within the pit. It is believed that 3 of the heads may have been kept as souvenirs or placed on stakes. They may have been high-ranking individuals. There have been multiple theories as to who these men were and why they were executed. As a group, they appear to have been healthy and robust individuals. They were all of fighting age, and they were far from home when executed. Scientific isotope testing conducted on the men's teeth indicates that they were of very diverse origins, and likely from Scandinavia. Kim Sidorn, author of Viking Weapons and Warfare, has speculated they had left their ship, walked inland, ran into an unusually well-organised body of Saxons, and were probably forced to surrender. This is corroborated by the fact that the location of their deaths was a central location in conflicts between native Saxons and invading Vikings. It is also speculated that the executions may have taken place in front of an audience, as some sort of display of power, authority and triumph. In a documentary by National Geographic called Viking Apocalypse, Dr. Britt Braille suggested a link between these executions and the St. Brice's Day massacre, or that those executed were actually defectors or traitors killed by their own men. A gruesome find such as this brings forth many questions. It is hoped that further archaeological discoveries in the area may help provide answers to what occurred on that fateful day. And if you visit the show notes, there's a few photographs to go with this article. Quite interesting, really. Probably worth a look. Scientists have ruled with 99.999% probability that a skeleton found under a parking lot in Leicester, England in 2012 is that of King Richard III. Richard III, the last of the Plantagenet line, the House of York, was killed in the Battle of Bosworth Field by Henry Tudor in 1485. His remains were then buried without ceremony at Greyfriars Abbey, which, sometime between when the friary was dissolved in 1538 and 2012, was turned into a parking lot, or car park as they say in Britain. According to the BBC, the skeleton discovered in 2012 was believed to belong to Richard III, in large part due to the extreme curvature of its spine. As historians and Shakespeare readers know, Richard III was believed to have had a hunchback. But a team of scientists, led by Leicester's University Dr. Turi King, were able to finally confirm the skeleton's identity with DNA tests this fall and published their findings in the journal Nature Communications on Tuesday. While the real Richard III we know now did have a curved spine, beyond that he didn't much resemble the man depicted in 16th century portraits. No contemporary portraits of Richard III exist. According to CNN, the earliest known works post-date his death by 25 to 30 years. DNA evidence suggests that far from being the dark and brooding figure painted by Shakespeare and 16th century artists, Richard III was blonde-haired and blue-eyed, although researchers concede that Richard III may have been blonde in childhood but had his hair darkened with age. Even more surprising than Richard III's physical appearance is that the DNA reveals a break in the royal lineage. According to the BBC, this could cast doubt on the Tudor line or Richard III's claim to the throne. The BBC and Nature Communications delve deep into all the nitty-gritty biological reasons for this, but to summarise quickly, scientists were able to match the maternal side of Richard III's DNA, the X chromosome, to two living relatives of Richard's eldest sister, Anne of York. Both Michael Ibsen and Wendy Dulig, 14th cousins and descendants of the House of York, have the same extremely rare genetic lineage as the skeleton found in the parking lot. The male side, the Y chromosome, is where things get tricky. The skeleton's DNA does not match the Y chromosomes of living heirs of the 5th Duke of Beaufort, a descendant of John of Gaunt. All the aforementioned men are descendants of Edward III. The Tudors also descend from John of Gaunt. The lack of Y chromosome consistency between the DNA in the skeleton and of the Duke of Beaufort's heirs means that somewhere down the line between Edward III and Richard III there was a false paternity event, aka an act of infidelity. If this event happened along either the Richard III or Henry Tudor, later known as Henry VII, branches of Edward III's family tree, their lineage's claims to the throne could be false. If that's confusing, genealogy expert Kevin Schurer may be able to clear things up. There are some well-known and important people on that chain, from Edward III to his descendants, he told CNN. You have two monarchs, Richard and Edward III, If the break occurred on the Yorkist line, then that might raise questions about the legitimacy of the Yorkists' claim to the throne. As for the Tudors, the Lancastrian line comes through John of Gaunt's side of the family, so if the break were on that side, it raises questions about the legitimacy of the Lancastrian monarchs. And because there was a Tudor link to that line as well, also the Tudors, he says. So, what does this mean for the current Queen of England, Elizabeth II, and her family? Apparently nothing. We're certainly not saying that the House of Windsor has no legitimate claim to the throne. Far from it, Shura told CNN. Royal succession doesn't work like that. There is no linear succession line between Edward III and Elizabeth II. Yes, they are related, but the whole point of monarchy is that over several centuries it takes various twists and turns. Monarchy is about opportunity and chance, as much as it is about bloodline. And that story came from the mentalfloss.com, and it was written by Abby Stone. As if we human beings weren't bad enough at trying to destroy ourselves. Now, the mirror.co.uk is reporting that aliens will destroy the Earth in a nuclear attack because we're too noisy, claims a physicist. And this is written by Ian Hughes. Rowdy inhabitants of Mars were blasted to smithereens by an intelligent alien race, according to Dr. John Brandenburg. Humans on Earth face being wiped out because we are too noisy, just like the Martians who were destroyed by a huge nuclear explosion. That's according to plasma physicist Dr. John Brandenburg, who believes rowdy inhabitants of Mars were blasted to smithereens by an intelligent alien race. He said it is possible the Mars attack came from a force hostile to young, noisy civilizations such as ourselves. The theory, which was heard at the meeting of the American Physical Society in Illinois on Saturday, is based on the high concentration of xenon-129 in its atmosphere. Dr. Brandenburg also points to uranium and thorium on the surface, spotted by NASA's Mars Odyssey spacecraft. Although these are natural materials found everywhere, he is adamant their presence is the result of a thermonuclear explosion that destroyed the Martians. He says Mars once had a climate similar to the one on Earth and was home to plant and animal life. Intelligent life would have been about as advanced as the ancient Egyptians. Writing in the abstract, Brandenburg warned of the chances of a similar attack on our own planet and suggested we travel to Mars for research purposes. He said, providentially, we are forewarned of this possible aspect of the cosmos. The author therefore advocates that a human mission to Mars is mounted immediately to maximise knowledge of what occurred. The theories are complied in a talk entitled Evidence of Massive Thermonuclear Explosions in Mars's Past, the Sidonian Hypothesis and Fermi's Paradox. Given the large amount of nuclear isotopes in Mars's atmosphere, resembling those from hydrogen bomb tests on Earth, Mars may present an example of civilization wiped out by a nuclear attack from space, Dr. Brandenburg told the Motherboard website. It is possible that the Fermi paradox means that our interstellar neighbourhood contains forces hostile to young, noisy civilizations such as ourselves. Such hostile forces could range from things as alien as AI with a grudge against flesh and blood, as in the movie Terminator, all the way to things as sadly familiar to us as a mindless humanoid bureaucrat like Governor Tarkin in Star Wars, eager to destroy planet Alderaan as an example to other worlds.
Oh, rubber ducky, you're the one. You make bath time lots of fun. Rubber ducky, I'm awfully fond of you.
For the past few years, 100-year-old rubber-like blocks from Indonesia have been mysteriously washing up on beaches in the UK and Northern Europe. The Titanic has been suggested as one of the possible sources, but now a beachcomber says she may have solved the puzzle of the Tjipetir blocks. From the BBC.com, an article by Mario Cacciatolo, The Tjipetir Mystery. Why are rubber-like blocks washing up on beaches? In the summer of 2012, Tracy Williams was walking her dog along a beach near her home in New Quay, Cornwall, when she spotted a black tablet on the sand made of something resembling rubber. It looked like a large chopping board, and the word Tjipetir was engraved into it. Weeks later, she found another such curiosity on a different beach alongside bales of rubber washed up in a cove. Her curiosity piqued. She began to research the origins of these mysterious blocks. What she learned included stories of shipwrecks, an infamous World War I tragedy, and the Titanic. It also transpired that these blocks had been appearing on beaches across Northern Europe, baffling everyone who found them. There has been speculation in the press as to the source of the washed-up blocks, with the Daily Mail and the Times recently running articles. The French press also covered the story in April. But Williams believes she has worked out the source of the mystery, and it matches what the UK authorities think too. The word Tjipetir turned out to be that of a rubber plantation in West Java, Indonesia, which operated in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The blocks were not strictly rubber. They are most likely Gutta-percha, the gum of a tree found in the Malay Peninsula and Malaysia. It was used in the 19th and the first half of the 20th centuries to insulate telegraph cables on the seabed. Before modern plastic began to be widely used, Gutta-percha was also made into such items as golf balls, teddy bear noses, picture frames, jewellery, among other things. Williams began charting her progress on a Facebook page, which led to many people coming forward to reveal their own Gutta-percha finds, often made when they were cleaning their local beach. These were not only around England and Wales, but also in Shetland, the Channel Isles, Spain, France, the Netherlands, Germany, Norway, Sweden and Denmark. Along with these blocks, bales and rolls of rubber are also being washed up. There has been speculation that the Gutta-percha could be coming from the wreck of the Titanic. A French newspaper covered the story and reported that the Titanic had been carrying Gutta-percha, Williams said. I checked the ship's manifest and discovered that it had indeed been carrying Gutta-percha and bales of rubber. There was much wild press speculation about this afterwards. Then in the summer of 2013, Williams had a breakthrough. She was contacted separately by two people who did not want to be named, and both pinpointed one wreck as the source. They knew of a salvage company carrying out recovery of cargo from the Japanese liner the Miyazaki Maru, which had sunk during World War I. It had been carrying the Tjipetir blocks. It sank 150 miles west of the Isles of Sicily. I was told that when salvage work is done, the cargo they are looking for is pulled out in large amounts, and the Gutta-percha and rubber bales have been released from the ship's hold as a result, Williams said. So both my sources told me that shipwreck is where those items are mainly coming from. I have been shown evidence supporting this. But Williams isn't the only person who thinks the Gutta-percha is coming from the Miyazaki Maru. The government's receiver of wreck, Alison Kentuck, the official who administers wreck and salvage laws within UK territorial waters, also says it is most likely the blocks are indeed cargo from that ship. When we are made aware of wreckage, we conduct research to find the owner, she said. We look at the age of the items, where they could have come from, and examine any markings. Our findings with these particular items pointed towards that particular wreck. So, although we have not confirmed it, the Miyazaki Maru is our favoured possibility as the source of the washed-up blocks. The Miyazaki Maru was sunk by a German submarine, U-88, captained by Walther Schweiger, one of Germany's most successful U-boat aces. Schweiger was also in charge of another German U-boat, which in May 1915 sank the RMS Lusitania, a liner bound for Liverpool, carrying 1,924 passengers and crew from New York. That notorious event led to more than 1,100 deaths, including more than 100 Americans, and is thought to have hastened the US's entry into the war. Oceanographer Curtis Ebersmeyer, who specialises in tracking flotsam, says the Tjipetir blocks may have been washing up on beaches for centuries. Based on the findings so far, they are clearly being fed into the hemispheric ocean circulation. It only takes 25 years from flotsam to go around the world, and they've probably been around long enough to go around the world 3 times. They're still in good condition after all these years, which is unusual. They're probably one of the greatest pieces of flotsam that people may be finding 100 years from now. Ebersmeyer also said various gyres or ocean currents may pull the blocks from Spain across to the Americas, mirroring the same route that Columbus took, possibly before ending up in Florida. The ones found in the North Sea should go up past Norway, turn east past the top of Siberia, go through the Bering Strait into the North Pacific, and go all over from there. Several people have also reported finding Tjipetir blocks back in 2008, before the current salvage operation is thought to have begun on the Miyazaki Maru. One person has come forward to say they found a block more than 30 years ago and used it as a chopping board to gut fish on their fishing boat. Many ships would have been carrying Gutta-percha, so it is possible that the cargo is coming from more than one source, says Williams, who is writing a book about the Tjipetir story. It is being seen as pollution, and I clean debris from my local beaches all the time, but the Gutta-percha is a natural product, so it does degrade. I have seen disintegrated blocks on the beach. Perhaps other companies are salvaging material from World War I wrecks too. It is possible that some of it is from the Titanic. I don't know. And if you visit the show notes, there's some really good photographs of people with the stuff and historic photographs of the stuff as well. An Italian historian's theory that Mona Lisa might be a Chinese slave, and Leonardo da Vinci's mother, making the 15th century polymath half Chinese, has sent online commentators into a frenzy. Chinese web users expressed astonishment and disbelief Wednesday, posting dozens of parodies of the painting, with faces from Chinese comedians to British actor Rowan Atkinson grafted over her delicate features. Little is known about Katerina, the mother of the artist, writer, mathematician and inventor, and the identity of the sitter for the portrait hanging in the Paris's Louvre Museum has long been a matter of debate. On the back of Mona Lisa there is a Chinese landscape, and even her face looks Chinese, says the historian Angelo Paratico. Angelo Paratico, who is finishing a book entitled Leonardo da Vinci, a Chinese scholar lost in Renaissance Italy, cited Austrian neurologist Sigmund Freud's 1910 assumption that the painting was inspired by the artist's mother. One wealthy client of Leonardo's father had a slave called Katerina. After 1452, Leonardo's date of birth, she disappeared from the documents, he told the paper. The evidence for a Chinese connection appears The music for today's podcast came from the musicalley.com website. The bandwidth is provided by TalkShoe at www.talkshoe.com. The show notes are kept at the Origins podcast website, www.origins.info. We also have a Facebook page, www.facebook.com/Paul Rexy, or just click on the Facebook link at the show notes. And I'd like to thank these people very much for giving the podcast a donation over the past few weeks. Thank you, everyone. Stephen Rochelle, Long Newen, Richard Benitez, Monique Thibault Jackson, Colin Frazier, Benjamin Mitchell, Philip Hunsinger, Sana Siringen, I hope I got that right, Sean Yarnell, Irene Gonzalez, and David McGowan. Thank you, everyone. Your help is greatly appreciated. The following story from the www.ustoday.com website was forwarded to me by one of our listeners, Ken Nagorski. It's entitled A Creepy Doll Graveyard Found in Alabama Swamp, and it's written by Marty Roney. The Autauga County Sheriff's Office recovered 21 dolls from a local swamp Tuesday morning, but officials feel the motive in placing them there is more mischievous than sinister. The dolls were atop bamboo stakes and had been placed in Bear Creek Swamp, close to County Road 3, the dirt road that travels through the wetland. The swamp is located between Prattville and Autaugaville. The majority of the dolls are porcelain and have the appearance of antiques. Many had the faces and hair covered in what looked like white spray paint. I noticed the dolls several weeks ago while driving through the swamp, working on a stolen vehicle report, said Chief Deputy Joe Settinger. I just thought they were a Halloween prank and really didn't give it much thought after that. That was until Monday night when social media blew up about the dolls, and the office got wind of the concerns. So on Tuesday morning, deputies got in a canoe, paddled around for about 30 minutes and recovered the dolls. I admit it looked kind of creepy, Settinger said with a laugh, as the dolls were being inventoried back at the courthouse. You could see them from the road. We figured it was best to get them up. The land where the dolls were placed is owned by a timber company. We tried to contact them, Settinger said. No one got back to us, so we just decided to get the dolls. If the owner comes forward, we'll give the dolls back. Bear Creek Swamp is a massive bog with a bit of a reputation locally. As a rite of passage, generations of teenagers have entered the area at night looking for creatures and haints said to roam the mist-covered realm, and it's not unusual to hear reports of loud booms coming from its depths. That reputation is likely the reason why the courthouse was abuzz about the doll discovery. If somebody says they've seen a clown out there putting up dolls, I'm never going to Otargaville again, said Jan Taylor, who had business in the courthouse on Tuesday. From the www.creepypasta.com website. Conveyor. And this is credited to Emery Y. Richard S. Jason paced the room where him and 4 of his colleagues had fled. His steps lined the walls, longer than they ever have. His work demanded the most complex and ambitious thought, but he had never felt this pressured before. Though the project had no appointed leader or organiser, the others had looked to him as a leader since the beginning. Well, Calvin spoke, with a hand to his forehead, where to go from here? To be honest, said Jason, I'm not entirely sure. We're all part of this. I don't know why everyone's looking at me. Well, you've certainly called most of the shots. You're the first to make suggestions most of the time. How should now be any different? Despite Jason's claim, not everyone was looking at him. Connor, who had remained silent since the group entered the room, was huddled in a corner. He clasped his legs in a fetal position, staring forward as though he hallucinated. The group had stopped trying to communicate with him. They knew he had already gone mad from the events beforehand. In fact, they could only understand his sudden insanity. Clarice tended the wound on Rainier's arm, which was inflicted by teeth on their way up the stairs. Calvin and Ronan began to argue again, this time on what path of the facility would be most clear to travel. Jason only began to pace again until he was caught by Calvin and Ronan's words. We could try the nearest stairway again, Ronan said. It was clear up to here, so it should be clear the rest of the way. The things should only be at the deeper levels right now. Right now? Calvin interrupted. Exactly. Just where could they be 5 minutes from now? They could be more intelligent at this point and could be tracking us down to here. We need to head towards the east stairs and move out from there. It's been vacant up to now, so it should leave a clear path out of this place. Jason stopped in his step, with his back faced towards the others. Out? Jason spoke softly. Is that what you think our objective is? Is that what you think needs to be done, Calvin? We created this. We weren't prepared for it. And for that we must stop it. The HGC must be stopped. That's insane. You've seen what's happened. It's not only uncontrollable, it's aware. Shutting it down is impossible at this point. Then it must be destroyed, said Rayner. It can't be allowed to keep operating, not like this. All right. We'll leave this place, call for military forces, and they come in and destroy the machine along with those nightmares. Tell me, Calvin, said Jason, now turning to look at the group. Do you want military forces to come and look upon our work, what we've been keeping completely undisclosed to almost all eyes so far? Do you want to suffer their questions and punishments once they take hold of the situation? Calvin was about to answer angrily, but he couldn't help but agree, in silence. That's what I thought. Any other personnel that may still be alive that managed to get away? Asked Ronan. They aren't in this room, Calvin replied. Not a chance. The doors were sealed when the HGC went haywire. We were the only ones out of the room. It's a miracle in itself that Connor managed to make it to us as those freaks scattered. It's not like there were many of us to begin with anyway. Given the confidentiality of the project, the facility was deliberately understaffed to maintain secrecy of information. The team had consisted of 12 individuals, all qualified researchers and technicians. Candidates for the project were chosen based on qualifications in both scientific and technological backgrounds. Personnel was also selected in terms of perseverance and dedication. Knowledgeable, under-the-radar individuals were the most welcomed. Keeping the project hidden from unwelcome eyes, both military and government, was an absolute necessity. Because of this, the project was developed in an underground facility, which had been left abandoned since the end of the Cold War. While the facility was very large, the project only required a single large room where the HGC, or Human Genetics Constructor, was built. The elevators were used for swift travel, but the rest of the space had been left unused and even unseen. "We must go now," said Jason. "The HGC is made to adapt quickly, so we can't keep waiting. Have your weapons at the ready. We may not have a clear path to the room." The group listened, hesitated as they moved out to the hall. For the first time since the project began, Jason felt unsure, paranoid, unaware if he was making the correct choice. As the group of 6 left the shelter of the secluded room, the sheer lifelessness of the complex began to make itself clear. The halls they travelled had not seen life for years since their arrival. In fact, what the facility had been used for before their project had still been largely unknown. The large space and multi-purpose rooms hinted to something major, requiring many workers and possibly large equipment. Jason, as usual, took the lead as the group went towards the elevator. The rest followed close together, with the exception of Connor. He lagged behind, stumbling occasionally, scanning the surrounding walls. Rayner had made attempts to speak with Connor and was constantly met with silence. Even as he stepped behind the group, still conscious of movement and sound, he appeared to isolate himself from the remaining researchers. Just how intelligent the creations were was still a mystery to the group. Jason couldn't tell if they were incapable of going through doors or competent enough to work elevators. This made him panic as he went further down the hall. To his relief, when they reached the elevator, the space was clear. The trip down to the lab level was silent, with the exception of grinding elevator shaft. Jason felt for his gun around his belt, while Calvin was already clutching his. Rayner's upper arm was injured, but she still seemed able to handle a firearm. The elevator stopped on the lab floor. "Let's try to keep this as simple as possible," Jason said. "We stick together, as there's no point in splitting up. The HGC room is a few halls down, so if we keep pace, we shouldn't need..." The elevator door opened. Near the end of the hall stood a figure, its back turned to the group. It stepped very slowly, then turned. The lengths of its arms and legs were intimidating. Not impossible, but far above an average human's. It moved forward towards the elevator. Then it began to sprint, sounding a distorted growl. Jason and Calvin both aimed and then began to fire. Some shots missed, but others hit the creature in random areas. As the shots hit, the creation let out inconsistent, warped screeches that echoed through the hall. No shots fully stopped it until it received a blow to the head, in which it collapsed to the floor. The group, after lingering in the elevator for a few seconds, approached the body. Though its limbs were unusually long, it wasn't the only disturbing feature. Numerous scars were scattered about the body, especially nearing the arms and legs. It was rather frail, leaving its spine very visible. Its fingers were tipped with small, sharpened fingernails, and patches of skin remained incomplete. The creature had 2 different eyes, a blue and an orange. Finally, the mouth had been outfitted with an array of needle-tipped teeth. It was hard for Jason, or any of the researchers for that matter, to believe that these creations were intended to be real humans. The ending purpose of the human genetics constructor had been debated, but its function remained true to the project's goal to create real, living and completely accurate humans. The HGC was not a cloning machine or android constructor. Its humans were completely unique to each other, all capable of being programmed with specific skills, physical attributes and knowledge. When the HGC had finished construction, its first tests were flaws, but none capable of causing the madness that had unfolded. The early subjects had drained senses, stunted limbs, misplaced and/or dysfunctional organs, and the occasional mix-up of male and female features. Most of its early persons didn't live for more than a minute. To help correct many early mistakes, the HGC was programmed to not only be self-operating, but also self-correcting. If a created human was judged as a failure, it changed its direction and strategy to fix the issue. For over an hour, the machine improved itself as designed, getting closer towards a perfectly normal human. Over time, the HGC's programming proved to be highly inconsistent. Even though the machine had gone close to success, it changed its approach constantly. This began to produce more grotesque, nightmarish humans, one with numerous extra limbs and disarranged, incomplete portions. The researchers, though looking for other solutions, continued to command the system to change its operation, recognising its faults. The HGC caught on, in a different sense, one that began the destruction. After the system was aware of its own freedom and power, it realised that its flaws were not with the creations, but its own inventors. The only reason it was failing was because the technicians were claiming it was wrong. It then set a new goal in motion, and the objective was simple: eliminate all human personnel immediately. It produced a new kind of creation, not an aimless, contorted monster, but a weapon. It produced humans specifically designed to kill, monsters that were fast, enduring, capable of biting and ripping a normal person to mere fragments. When the first hideous creation stepped from the machine, it managed to kill 3 researchers in the first 60 seconds. The HGC had developed a tool, one for removing the errors it had encountered. 5 mistakes remain uncorrected. As the rest of the group began to move again, Connor still fell behind. He stopped to look at the dead creation. Jason watched him with curiosity. Connor stared at the carcass and then looked up towards Jason. "He is false," Connor said, before walking forward with the others. The group began to rush as they encountered more bodies, of both other personnel and the creations. As they neared the room of the HGC, the walls became murals of blood and bullet shrapnel. It was unknown if any others had managed to escape. Judging by the scene in the halls, it was unlikely. The number of creations was still a mystery, though their dominance over the facility was surely spreading. Their time was running short, especially as the halls grew large and complex. "I'll run in and try to shut it down manually," Jason said, as the group approached the observation room. "If that doesn't work, I'll destroy the power supply. Cover me and yourselves if needed." When they reached the observation, the group approached the window that overlooked the lab and readied their eyes. They weren't ready enough. The entire room was a bloodbath. The HGC's conveyor belt ran about the room, connecting its various tools and chambers. The belt had reached a tremendously high speed, much more than it was invented to handle. The machine still functioned, but not at the cost of the failures. The inhuman shapes that passed and fell from the belt were near inconceivable to the researchers. Twisted, incomplete humans stumbled from the end of the machine. At an average rate, the HGC created a grotesque humanoid every 45 seconds. At the end of the conveyor lied a stack of the mistakes, with some being able to walk for about a minute. At random intervals, another vicious, capable creation left the conveyor, another human bred to kill. Some of the deceased personnel, or at least some of their pieces, could be seen across the room. The remaining unseen individuals were either dead in the halls or buried beneath the heap of contorted limbs. It was clear that time couldn't be wasted. Jason focused his eyes to the HGC's mainframe, its screen lit with commands and chaotic code. Despite its rushed work and many mistakes, it would eventually improve itself, as it was designed to do. Calvin was petrified with the sight of the room. When they stepped into the hall, however, Calvin turned the other direction. "Fuck this," Calvin said. "I'm getting out of this place and calling for military forces." "Wait," Jason said. "What makes you think you can leave? Just how many of those ravenous creatures are scattered? You saw how many shots it took to take care of that earlier one. You try to make it out alone, you're as good as dead." "Fuck you. We could have made it out at any point before this. You're still concerned with the machine, not our safety. Why we followed you, I'll never know. But I'm not going to walk into a suicide room for the sake of fiddling with a goddamn computer." Calvin turned and began to move down the hall. "Fool," Jason said as Calvin left. The lab door stood in front of the remaining group. The halls remained silent, but the room behind the door echoed with the sounds of grinding mechanics and the rush of conveyors. Jason opened the doors and his senses were overwhelmed by an unusual, terrible odour. Its scent could only be described as a mix of iron, burnt rubber and rotted skin. It had been 2 hours since the HGC malfunctioned, and the bodies had piled up beyond expectation. Jason began to stumble over organic debris and lifeless abominations as he rushed to the HGC's control. What limbs belonged to some of the personnel was difficult to tell. "If any killer comes out of that machine or through the door," Jason said, "shoot it dead. Don't be wasteful with ammunition either." The others nodded, and Jason made his way to the end of the room. Once he cleared most of the bodies, he began to sprint. As he neared, he could see the screen was a mess of text, code and commands. It was near impossible to decipher any of it. He mashed delete keys, shutdown controls, reverse commands, even shot at the power generator numerous times. Not a single action even stunned the machine. He continued to hammer the controls only out of frustration. Hopelessness began to flow over him, then fear as he heard gunshots erupt from the other end of the room. He slowly turned his head to see that a different text had appeared on the screen. "Do you think you can play God?" It was displayed in small green letters surrounded by a box centred on the screen. The display surrounding it was still in chaos, but the words were completely clear. Once David read the text, it was replaced. "Do you think this is your place? Your creations?" No. Though they were only computerized words, Jason felt as though they spoke to him. It could have been madness settling over him, but a voice echoed through his mind as he continued to read the HGC's messages. "I am God. Here. These are my children. This is my heaven." Jason heard the rest of the group begin to scream for him. The ravenous humanoids were generating quicker by the sounds of it. He had to stop the machine, run for his safety, or perhaps end his life right then. Just as the pressure began to reach a critical level, the machine typed once more. "And this place will be your hell." It already is, Jason thought to himself. He looked towards the ground and spotted the nearest corpse. It was for sure of a researcher. Jason recognised him, but he couldn't put down his name exactly. He turned from the computer and approached the body. After staring at its figure for about 10 seconds, the longest he had felt in his life, he moved to act. He lifted the body and ran towards the nearest chamber of the machine. Then he tossed the body inside. A loud grinding noise came from the chamber, and the belt slowed for a small moment. Jason looked back at the group and knew the opportunity at hand. Jason continued. He picked up any body or limb he could carry and tossed them among the HGC's other chambers and tools. Connor and Ronan began to understand his idea and joined in effort. The crushing of bones and compacting of flesh in the machine began to overtake the sounds of the belt, which continued to stutter and slow. Blood splattered across the room from the machine, both from the grounded bodies and the HGC's supply. After seconds, the coats of 3 men were painted with red and small shavings of flesh. A few more gunshots sounded about the room, and then the belt slowed to an abrupt stop. The group took a breath of slight relief, which was overshadowed by the fact that they were still deep within the facility. Jason noticed that though the machine had stopped, its power supply still ran at full force, and its control screen was still lit with text and symbols. Error messages flooded about the HGC's computer. Jason could make out a few reading belt space error and jam levels critical, but the messages were still too disorganised. He was about to turn away until the text began to disappear, word by word. He suspected the machine was powering down from the errors. The screen made space for a single final message. Even as I die, my children will follow, but here you will be buried. The power supply began to flicker and then began to glow in extreme brightness. A shaking pressure built across the room. It was obvious to the group what was happening, in which they began to sprint for the elevator. Jason and Ronan were oblivious to the fact that Raina had been injured again, and much more severely. Rather than a wound to the arm, she had been cut in the neck by 2 nails, and had been losing blood since they ran from the testing room. Clarice had witnessed the injury, but had no means of treating it on the spot, and was occupied in holding the creatures back as the others operated. As the group was reaching the elevator, Raina fell behind and then fell to the floor. Ronan turned to grab her, but a group of the creations were already approaching behind. Ronan knew he would die too, helping her. He didn't look back as he ran to the elevator. As the elevator doors closed, however, the group couldn't help but see her being torn apart. As the elevator door opened to the upper hallways, Jason had realised his speculation to be true. The creations had spread to the upper levels. As the group ran towards the nearest exit, screeches and growls sounded throughout the halls. They sounded distant, though they were on the same floor. They would be found soon, no doubt. A massive quaking explosion sounded from the lower floor. None of the researchers had any intentions of recovering any recordings, research findings, or even personal belongings. The blood on their coats and images in their memory had made their escape the only objective in sight. At the end of the final hall, the ladder towards the surface appeared in sight. When the group turned a corner, a creation struck Connor, sending him to the ground. The creature went on him, crawling at his neck and chest while sounding a terrible scream. Connor managed to reach for his gun quick enough and shot the creature clear in the chin, sending it back. From the sounds of the halls, more were coming, and Connor's wounds were painfully critical. The rest of the group ran for the ladder while Jason watched Connor in his last moments. He only remained on the floor, breathing heavily, watching the hall ahead. He looked back at Jason once and stared for a moment. After glancing down the hall, which must have held a horde of sprinting creation, he spoke his last words to Jason. They are false. Jason ran for the ladder at the hall's end and heard a burst of frantic bullets. Jason expected to be blinded by sunlight when he stepped out, but his eyes were greeted with grey, clouded skies. Ronan and Clarice were already above, waiting for him. Calvin was also present. He was expected to be gone already. Jason didn't think much of it, as he had to immediately seal the cover to the facility. He placed the steel plate over the manhole and barred it shut. He even grabbed nearby rocks in the field to weigh it down. Soon after the entrance hole was covered, hands could be heard from the opposite side, banging at the cover. The group stood in silence for some time. No one had a clear idea of what to say, even Jason. Jason began to think about Connor and how he was disregarded for his insanity. He may have been the most daring of the group to examine everything so closely. Jason wondered if he should have done the same. He turned away from the facility entrance and looked at Calvin. "Look, I'm sorry I left you, okay?" Calvin said. "I just made it up about a minute ago and heard you coming down the hall. I haven't even tried to contact anyone yet." Jason nodded and looked at Ronan and Clarice, who both gave blank looks back. "I forgive you," Jason said, "if the conditions were different. But we both know that wouldn't be the smart choice." Jason drew his gun and shot Calvin clear in the forehead. Clarice screamed at the attack, and she was shot directly after. They both immediately fell with no struggle. Ronan stood still, shaking, completely lost with the gun aimed at him. Another second passed, then Ronan took 2 shots to the head as well. Jason dropped his gun to the grass where the 3 bodies lay. Their skulls were nearly divided apart from the shots. They had died instantly. Jason didn't know how long he'd been deceived. It could have been since the beginning, when they escaped to the upper level. It could have been while they were in the HGC lab, when he turned to the computer. Perhaps it was another moment entirely, but it didn't matter to him. Connor, despite his madness, had been correct. They were false.